All right, in this unit, we are going to be looking at aquatic biomes, focusing on the two major biomes, your freshwater and marine, looking at characteristics of each, the different zones, some examples of animals, fauna, flora for these particular biomes. So let's go ahead and get started. We know that the Earth is roughly covered with about 70-71% water. That includes all your fresh water, all your saltwater examples, and so we break these two. We break this water that covers the Earth down into two categories, and it is freshwater and marine. Um, we're going to categorize freshwater if the water supply holds less than 1% of salt. That's how we're going to categorize it as being freshwater. Your ponds, most of the lakes that are on the planet, and then your rivers and wetlands. Most of the wetlands as well. Those are going to fall underneath the freshwater category. Then marine is going to obviously be more than that. The marine biome is also going to cover most of the surface area of the planet compared to your freshwater and land biomes. Um, your marine biomes are very, very important, not only for the habitats that are supplied, but they are very big carbon dioxide sinks. They absorb most of the carbon dioxide that's produced on the planet. And as far as the biomes that fall underneath the marine category, you have oceans, coral reefs, estuaries. Estuaries are types of wetlands. Um, and then we'll get into like the subcategories of those as we go. So let's focus on freshwater first. Let's look at those examples. Everybody knows what a lake is. You've seen a lake before. A lake is just a large body of fresh water. It is surrounded by land. There's no outlet to it, so there's no water source that flows in or out of that lake or that body of water naturally. Okay, so it's not fed by a river. It's not fed by streams, like large streams. It doesn't connect to, say, the ocean, so it doesn't have an outlet. Usually they form from, say, underground streams or dam streams, water tables that are below level, and most of the time they are temporary features on the land. Okay, they could be there 1 year, a part of the year, and then another part of the year they could be gone, depending on um, the cycle of heat versus or warm temperatures versus cold temperatures. We can break lakes up into three categories. All right, they as far as three zones, a lake will have three major zones. We're going to call those littoral, limnetic, and profundal. And within each of these zones, you're not going to find a large species diversity. All right, the species are going to be very limited in these zones due to the isolation of the lake. But the littoral is the one that's closest to the shoreline. All right, it's a lot of warm water because of the shallow part of the lake. So a lot of photosynthesis is going to occur here. A lot of your aquatic plants will be found here. Crustaceans, those types of things, small fish. The fish will usually lay their eggs in this area, and then the small fish will grow. You'll get insects that'll leave their larvae here, and those types of things. You go a little bit further out and get a little bit further deep into the ocean. The limnetic is kind of like the lake. The limnetic zone is kind of like the open water of the lake. Okay, still gets a lot of light. You get your phytoplankton here, your zooplankton, and then obviously most of your larger fish will be found in this zone. Then as you travel deeper down into the lake, you reach a part to where there's not going to be much sunlight. You're going to have a lot of density in this area due to water pressure. Most of your dead life or dead material from once living is going to float into this area. You will get your scavengers in this area. You might have some bottom feeders, those types of things. Here's a good picture. It's going to give you a good example. If you look at this, the shoreline obviously is where you're going to find the littoral zone. The open water of the lake is going to be your limnetic. And then once you get down to a point to where you don't get much sunlight, you get to the bottom feeders and those types of things, you'll reach the profundal. All right, let's look at some examples of lakes. There are some saltwater lakes. Okay, obviously, what lakes form, there's not going to be an outlet. Usually, you'll have water that mixes with some type of of soil composition or rock composition in the area that's going to produce a lot, or it's going to have a mixture of a lot of salts in it as a result. They usually are found in more hot regions or higher temperature regions on the planet, because the water does tend to evaporate quite a bit from these saltwater lakes during large parts of the year, and as a result it leaves salt beds or salt flats as a result of that. But then the ones that we tend to think about, especially here in the U.S., are our man-made lakes, or they're these reservoirs. They're going to be made by damming up rivers. Sometimes they can be made by filling in abandoned mine pits, or digging out, like if it's a smaller lake, digging out the holes. But usually it's from abandoned mine pits or damming up rivers, putting a dam somewhere to make one of these man-made lakes. Now, lakes are very important. Okay, definitely important because they're a source of fresh water. Our source of fresh water here in this area is going to be Lake Lavon. Lake Lavon supplies North Texas, your Plano, Allen, Frisco, Richardson area with water. It is they can be sources for agriculture reasons, irrigation for agriculture. Certain areas will use lakes, like Lake Chad in Ethiopia is definitely a lake that has been overused due to irrigation for crop and agriculture reasons in that area. Navigation, right? Our biggest lakes here in the U.S., the Great Lakes, they were definitely used for navigation. They still are, but back when the states first started and you had a lot of transportation and industrial revolution, the lakes were used for that. And then obviously recreation and food sources. Okay, so another example of freshwater is going to be ponds. Ponds are just smaller versions of lakes, obviously smaller and less deep, more shallow. They're usually going to run about 6 to 7 feet deep. They're not that deep. They're obviously not going to be that big. You get a lot of amphibians, a lot of plant growth, lily pads, green plants, a lot of algae, reeds will grow in this area. And like I said, amphibians are going to be one of the big types of animals that you'll find. Also, your aquatic turtles will be big supply in these ponds as well. They're exactly like lakes in the fact that they are isolated. They have low species diversity. They're just smaller versions. Okay, another example of a freshwater source are going to be rivers. Okay, aside from some of the larger lakes on the planet, our rivers are going to hold most of the fresh water that is found on the planet. Rivers always move from higher elevation or higher altitude to lower altitude. They always flow from high up to lower to sea level. So usually river sources are going to start higher up in the mountains, or are fed by headwaters from the mountains, and then they will flow down lower, heading towards sea level. That's how rivers flow. Rivers always always flow in one direction. Okay, high altitude to low altitude. All rivers except for one are going to flow south as a result of this. It's weird how it's made up, but all of the big rivers on the planet, they all start in high altitudes and in the northern part of where they start, and then they flow south. The only exception is the Nile River. The Nile River is actually going to flow north, but it is still flowing from a higher altitude to lower altitude. The source of a river could be springs. Usually it's small streams that start up in mountain or high elevation areas known as headwaters. And rivers and streams are pretty much the same, except there's a difference in size. And so obviously the difference in size is going to account for the difference in water flow, difference in erosion, those types of things. So more information about rivers. They do have high levels of oxygen, but they only have high levels of oxygen at the source of the river, where the river starts, which is usually in the headwaters, in the higher elevated areas. As the rivers flow down elevation, they're going to start to slow down, and the more they slow down, the less oxygen they're going to have, and the more sediment they're going to carry. They do have a very diverse species that can be accounted for in rivers, whether it be plant or animal species. And then all rivers are going to end into the mouth or the delta. Mouth or delta is going to be where they end, and they'll usually end into a sea, into the ocean, or maybe they'll feed into one of the large lakes that are accounted for on our planet, that are unique to most lakes. Ton of different, like I said, species diversity, where you're talking about insects or plant life, different types of fish, amphibians, reptiles that can be found in them. Rivers, once again, kind of the same thing as lakes as far as importance. Navigation is probably one of the biggest things for a river. Rivers are used for navigation more than anything. The second thing that they're going to be used for is obviously a water source and then food supply. They can be used for irrigation. It's not as easy to use them use them as an irrigation source as it is as a lake source, because rivers flow, and you have other things that tie into that. Rivers have a big impact on changing of the landscape. They can definitely change the landscape through erosion. Think of the Colorado River, Grand Canyon as an example. Sometimes rivers will mark boundaries between states or provinces or things like that, depending on the country you're looking at. Here's a couple of good pictures. Amazon River. Everybody should be familiar with a picture of the Amazon. It's a winding river. It's obviously you have the rainforest that surrounds it. The Amazon is fed by two smaller tributaries, which are the Rio Negro and the Rio Solimões. Okay, one comes from the mountain range, and another one comes from a different source. So one's going to carry rich nutrient, colder waters. The other's going to carry more sediment waters. Amazon's going to hold a large supply, roughly a third of the water that's going to flow on the planet, that's fresh water, is going to flow through the Amazon. I've talked about the Nile River. The Nile River is the longest river on the planet. It's also the one that is unique because it flows differently than every other large river on the planet. Most all large rivers are going to flow south, always high to low level elevation, but the Nile River is going to flow north. And then streams. Streams are just, I mentioned this before, smaller versions of rivers. Okay, they're still going to have the erosive power. They can still be used as sources of food or sources of irrigation, but you're going to streams will have a bigger tendency to be seasonal, which means they'll show up during certain times of the year, but then they can dry out during other times of the year. Streams and rivers, I've mentioned this before. Erosion is a big staple of streams. They have the ability to change landscape. Most all streams are going to start in the mountains, rainfall, and then the rainfall is going to help erode the sediments that form the mountains, and then that sediment is going to be transported and be deposited in other places. That helps transport nutrients and those types of things that can be found in the rocks and sediments that are formed in the mountains. And then wetlands. Wetlands is the last type of freshwater source. Examples: marshes, swamps, bogs. Wetlands are going to be very humid and moist. You have specific types of plants and animals that are going to grow just in wetlands. Wetlands are also very important because they're good natural filters. They naturally filter the water. They filter all the impurities, the sediments out of the water, and help clean the water naturally. Then here's just what marshes versus swamps versus estuaries look like. A little bit more information about estuaries. Okay, estuary is going to be a mixture of salt water and fresh water. Rivers meet the ocean.